As the United States enjoys the strength it derives via its rich diversity, and as a united people look forward to the lead up to taking part in the 4-year election cycle come November, the Chinese, in contrast, are laying down intergenerational plans, mapping out their country's geopolitical and geostrategic moves decades into the future. While the system that will arise to replace it is still being worked out, most are beginning to agree that the end of the US-led global system is upon us, and that many countries will have to rethink their place in the world, and especially their relationship with China. The EU and its mandarins are very much concerned by the shifting tides of geopolitical statecraft and have come to see and to believe that we are now on the cusp or the dawn of the Asian century. While I myself wouldn't go that far, the rise of China and the tectonic shift that this has had and will have on global systems cannot be ignored. Very importantly is that China is not only an authoritarian nation, but it also does not share the same religious, civic, and most importantly, moral codes and taboos as the Western world. And because of this, we could be looking at a world wherein eugenics will come to dominate decisions not only on fertility, but also on the military. Hi everyone, just to let you know, I have some old favorites as well as new t-shirt designs on sale right now. Link to find them is in the description, and would like to thank you in advance, as it really does help the channel, as for years now, content like this has been put into an algorithmic black hole, as well as being demonetized. So thanks again, as well as I'm pretty sure you'll find something you will like. Before this video begins, I would like to encourage new viewers to subscribe to this channel, but more importantly, for returning viewers, please check that you're still subscribed, as I've received thousands of messages from people that have been unsubscribed by YouTube without their knowledge or consent. That said, thanks for arriving via whichever way, and let's get started. I'm a sci-fi fan. I read basically two kinds of books, nonfiction and science fiction. The Dune series, including the new ones by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, are my favorite. I'm no longer a Star Wars fan and strangely liked Deep Space Nine more than The Next Generation. I like the reimagined Battlestar Galactica as well as Babylon 5, and 2001: A Space Odyssey is one of my favorite movies. Another movie I really liked was Gattaca. Now, Gattaca was set in a dystopian future where the character Vincent, played by Ethan Hawke, desperately wants to travel into outer space, but is grounded by his status as a genetically inferior invalid. So what he does is he decides to fight his fate by purchasing the genes of Jerome, played by Jude Law, a laboratory-engineered valid. Long story short, it provides a cautionary tale with regards to eugenics and the bettering of the human species via science. In the woke 2020s, the word eugenics itself is portrayed as hateful, and to even speak on it could be construed as a hate crime in many Western countries in the 21st century. And because we have collectively decided that we are more sophisticated, we are more enlightened than our ancestors, well, we've rejected much of the cultural sensibilities that they had passed down on through the centuries. While we might be more sophisticated, we are less intelligent than our ancestors, at least new research has postulated, and we're getting less and less intelligent as the years go by. Mankind evolved to become slightly brighter over the past few millennia thanks to circumstances that favored the survival of the sharpest, but the inherited part of a person's intelligence, which accounts for roughly 50 to 80% or thereabouts of the differences between individuals, may well have weakened since the Victorian era, and that is according to academics. An international team led by Michael Woodley of the Free University in Brussels claims that up to and until 180 years ago, people were getting smarter thanks to natural selection favoring survival of the sharpest. The emergence of farming, cities, and government would have made it easier for smarter people to get on in life, have more children, and pass on their genes more widely. But that trend has now been reversed. Genes driving intelligence have become less common since Victorian times because advances in medicine and nutrition mean that people with lower IQs can have more children that survive into adulthood. Woodley explained it as thus: selection is key. When you must use your wits to survive and restrain present urges for future gains, then the brighter will multiply. When in less taxing circumstances or environments, there is no particular need for wit or restraint, then there is no premium for those characteristics. Either way, the future of our species doesn't look particularly bright, and there's no pun intended. Hardly anyone believes that there is something wrong for an individual to try and improve himself, and few people believe that it's wrong to try and improve society. What then is the horror of trying to create better individuals and a better society, as well as rid our world of disabilities and disease? What's so bad with that? Well, in the past, one of the moral issues of eugenics was that of striving for control over individuals, because individuals are too diverse and unpredictable to expect them to independently make choices that will comply with the eugenicists' preferences. But now, the building of a better human no longer requires such coercion. In April 2008, Dartmouth College ethics professor Ronald M. Green's essay, Building Baby from the Genes Up, was published in the Washington Post. Green presented his case in support of genetically engineering embryos, arguing that tinkering with genes could eliminate diseases or confer desirable features onto our future progeny. Why not improve our genome? He asked. Well, the controversy, or controversy, however you'd like to pronounce that word, revolves around what scientists are calling reprogenetics. That is the combination of reproductive and genetic technologies to select and someday even genetically modify embryos before implantation, not for health reasons, but for the sake of, quote, improvement, closed quote. And it is this improvement that horrifies some people. But what's wrong with improving ourselves? While we in the West argue about the ethics and condemn the views of our ancestors and continue the mental gymnastics that we as a society have engaged in since at least the end of the Second World War, the Chinese are already well on their way and are leading the way for the world, whether the West likes it or not, in genetically engineering human embryos, which it has already reportedly done in 2015. And moreover, experts predict that China will be developing the first genetically enhanced, quote, superhumans, closed quote, while Western nations desperately seek equality of outcome for all of their population. And while many of China's detractors call it the Wild West of genetic research, as they do not have the same cultural taboos around eugenics or the ethical dilemmas that stymie the same research in the West, these taboos in the West are strong, very strong. In fact, public opinion studies found significant opposition in countries like Germany, the US, and the UK to selecting the best embryos for implantation based on non-medical traits like appearance or intelligence. There's even less support for editing genes directly to improve traits in so-called designer babies. And most importantly, in the West are the worries about inequality, of creating a new generation of enhanced individuals who are heavily advantaged over others.
And now, Khan is my name. Khan, nothing else. Khan. Mr. Khan will take very little time.
According to Human Genetics Alert Director Dr. David King, we need for an immediate global ban on the creation of genetically modified designer babies. He went further that it's critical that we avoid a eugenic future in which the rich can buy themselves a baby with built-in genetic advantages. While the West is grappling with the moral and potential ethical problems of genetically modified babies, the Chinese apparently do not. Already, it's a country with one of the highest average IQ populations. Again, for those that are triggered, that is the average. I will say that again. There is always a bell curve, but the average IQ for the Chinese population is 105, according to most estimates. But there are many in the country that want to raise that even higher. And in the world's first, in 2015, researchers at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou confirmed that they had engineered embryos to modify the gene responsible for a fatal blood disorder. And in response, the same experts that hoped for a global ban are, in fact, begrudgingly also of the opinion that China might force other countries to reluctantly join in this kind of research, lest they be left behind. And in fact, join in they have. In experiments that were conducted by a group of scientists in Oregon, well, they have successfully modified genes of embryos using CRISPR, which is a cut and paste gene editing tool, and that was reported in July 2017. And if rumors are to be believed, the new results are much more promising than earlier efforts by the Chinese in 2015, and that's according to Technology Review. And at least one ethical hurdle has been overcome in that a National Academy of Sciences report published last year suggested that embryo editing could be ethical in the case of severe genetic diseases. And in a recent turn of events that horrified many in the West, the Chinese may have already created the world's first gene-edited babies at the Southern University of Science and Technology in Shenzhen. The experiment was led by biophysics researcher He Jiankui, who was actually listed as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people of 2019, and claims that 3 babies were born in mid-October 2018 with their DNA altered to prevent them from contracting HIV. However, he was later sentenced to 3 years in jail for, quote, illegally carrying out human embryo gene editing, closed quote, intended for reproduction by a court in South China's Shenzhen city on the 30th of December 2019. And now, adding to that, in June 2020, there is now strong speculation that the Chinese are considering plans to genetically modify humans to create super soldiers that could be faster, stronger, and more clever than their battlefield opponents, and even with the possibility of them not feeling pain. So what's clear in all of this is that East Asians, and the Chinese in particular, do not have the same inbuilt cultural taboos around science that creates problematic ethical dilemmas that challenge notions of equality. And the Chinese will almost certainly employ this technology, which will most certainly force other nations to follow suit. This is all but inevitable. The United States, nor the UK, nor any Western country terrified of the repercussions of genetic inequality will be able to globally stamp out this new technology. And as summarized at the beginning of this presentation, the days of the West dictating to the rest are coming to a close. But there are very significant questions to be asked. How would the world function with an emerging future of 2 tiers of humans, in the parlance of Gattaca, valids and invalids? One thing to consider very carefully is the example of Dr. Calhoun's Mouse Utopia experiment and that of unexpected results of what we think might be a great idea. This is a very messy game that we are playing at. Also to consider is that having a higher IQ doesn't rule out the possibility of having other dangerous human flaws like psychopathy or narcissism. Again, Star Trek's Khan Noonien Singh comes to mind, or using the analogy of Dune, we might end up with twisted mentats rather than guild steersmen or Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers. But for those with moral and ethical objections, and if history is any guide on things like blood transfusions, inoculations, in vitro fertilization, and organ transplants, these objections won't matter in the long run, as it seems likely to eventually be adopted, just like any other medical procedure that makes the patient healthier and less susceptible to disease, or just to increase quality of life. Now, many would suggest, and I can think of one person in particular, that this should never be done for the safety and the continuance of our species. But let's be real. We're an animal that cracked the atom not for science, but for war. Once the genie is out of the bottle, it's difficult to impossible to put it back in. If people can do a thing, they will do a thing. Gene editing is happening no matter the debate. It'll probably just take one gene editing designer, Chinese Einstein, to kick off the race. But either way, it's going to be messy and not easy, and without a doubt, if China hasn't already, it will continue to move forward with its plans on genetic research. But the morals and ethics of this have to be worked out, or it could be a disaster for all. Just as a postscript for this video, and if it does garner some interest and is not shadow banned as badly as my other videos are by YouTube, I'll do a follow-up on the as yet decades away process of multi-generational in vitro embryo selection, also known as iterated embryo selection, or IES, which refers to a not yet developed biotech technique that could be used to select human embryos for specific genotypes. IES, like the currently existing practice of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, would allow for designer babies, but this technique would simulate evolution on a much shorter timescale and could very well lead to a god-like species. Think the engineers in Prometheus or the Kwisatz Haderach in Dune, and could hypothetically produce beings with IQs in the 4 digits. But also, in the end, I think that throwing the genetic dice, as the parents of Vincent did in the movie Gattaca, will always be a choice open to people that do not want to partake in this new chapter of human-driven evolution of our species. Thanks very much. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, as well as consider subscribing, but make sure you're still subscribed, because YouTube will unsubscribe you given the chance. Again, thanks very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.